Okay, thank you very much for joining us today, Mara and Cory. I really appreciate it. Let's just jump into things and let's start about 101 Ash Street. Mara, I want to understand what role you think you had at the very beginning. I saw recently that La Prensa reported that Jan Goldsmith had given you access to files in the office as soon as you were elected. So that's about a 6-week window before you were sworn in, and obviously the contract was approved a week after. So what role did you, and also I want to understand one other thing. I understand that you dealt with contracts in a prior life, so I want to understand what oversight role you may have had, should have had, and did have on that. So why don't you walk us through from your time of your election to the signing of that contract and what role you had and what role you should have had.
Yeah, all right. Well, I appreciate that question. So my administration did not work on 101 Ash. This is a deal that happened months before I took office. And as a chief deputy city attorney, and that's a position I continued to hold even when I was running for office, my work was on purchasing and contracting. So that's your day-to-day goods and services contracts. When you come into office, of course, there's that transition period. And I was not told, nor would I have suspected, that there were any issues with 101 Ash. Jan Goldsmith is a great lawyer. He has a good team of attorneys who were supporting him through that transaction. It went through a couple of hearings before the city council. It was before the public. It was signed off by the mayor. There was a period in which the public could have challenged it. There were no challenges. And also it completely replicated a deal that occurred back in 2015. The building I'm in, the CCP building, has the exact same terms. So there were no red flags that would have caused me to go back and review whether or not Jan Goldsmith and his team of attorneys did their job correctly. So my work as the public services chief deputy city attorney was on things like environmental services, goods and services for purchasing and contracting, just any type of service that might come before the city. So again, there were no flags, but this is an absolute priority. As city attorney, we got about 20,000 cases that come through our criminal division every year, and about 200 to 230 new civil litigation cases a year. And then there's the everyday matters that keep us all so busy. I can only pick and choose to get very involved in certain things, like I did with SDSU West. I am 100% involved in remedying 101 Ash and trying to get to the bottom of it, trying to get as much money back as I can for the city of San Diego. And I suspect that's going to take all my time. We have a great team of experts that are helping us. We are working very cooperatively with an outside law firm that has sued the city and sued the deal makers on this case, and I'm confident we'll get there.
And why didn't you then take more of a closer look in 2018 when the council considered these 30 million in renovations? It seems like that's a time where you would have done your due diligence, even if you're saying that it wasn't your responsibility at the outset. That clearly fell into your purview, and there was nothing at the time that surfaced.
That's what the experts are supposed to tell us. I am not a building expert. And city staff had told us that they expected that that amount of money would be enough to be able to have everybody move into that building. And I think with the reports that we have seen, this was not known to everybody, that the due diligence did not occur before the deal was made. I was not aware of that in 2018 either. This really came to light with the reports that have been issued this year. So of course I'm looking at this closely. Of course we're going to put all of our energy into remedying 101 Ash. It's really important. And it's important for our long-term stability too, because we do have city employees that need a place to go. I don't think that the need for the city is going to go away. I think the issue is how much will it cost us? So my goal, of course, is to pull back the layers and try to figure out how we can resolve this to the benefit of the city of San Diego. But there were no flags back in 2018, and I think the council would attest to that. We're learning that right now. You know, flags, of course, were problems. Problems that would undo a deal or indicate that there was fraud at that time, that was not present.
Before I turn to Cory, let me ask you two other questions on this. So why you didn't decide to withhold lease payments for a long time? A lot of headlines complaining about $535,000 payment a month, $18,000 a day. Why did you delay, and why are you so confident now that the city is on firm legal ground and as is contract to stop making those payments? That seems like a gamble.
Well, I can't tell you that we are, I can't tell you the strength of the position, of course. I'm saying that we're going to give the best arguments we have, as will the other side. What was not evident 2 years ago was that there was information that was not shared, and there was a total and complete inability to use this building. So we brought in outside counsel who specialize in looking in transactions like this to help us navigate that. It is not responsible for me to start making accusations against anybody. Fraud, as our outside attorney mentioned at a recent public hearing, needs to be substantiated. This requires us to make sure we're doing things right and not to make allegations that cannot be supported. And that's why we have to have these experts who are peeling back the layers. I've never in my practice of law made unsubstantiated claims, because in the end, with a knee-jerk reaction like that, and certainly we're all feeling the heat, it doesn't do anything for the city of San Diego to move the conversation forward. The best case scenario is for us to be able to sit down at a table with everybody involved in this transaction and work out a resolution that is going to serve the city of San Diego. And like I said, that building is needed. Now, maybe post-pandemic we'll say, we don't need so much space. I think we're all taking a look at whether or not that is true. But it appears to me from the representations from my client that we still need a building to house individuals because we were leasing for some time and now we need somewhere to put these folks. So in my mind, you have to be very careful. You have to be calculated in your decision making. You need to have the evidence to support your position. The last thing I want to do is have the adverse parties walk away, because we're going to be in years and years of litigation. And I still remain confident that we will be able to work with them and with the attorneys who are adverse to the city to find a resolution that can move the city forward. That is my job. But knee-jerk reactions are not how I operate.
And then another question: will your office release? Will the city release all the reports about this? It seems like there's a lot of demand and interest in these reports, and seeing them would clear up some confusion.
Yeah, there is a great deal of pressure to release the documents, and that rests with the city council as a legislative body. They have to vote to disclose these documents, just as they voted not to disclose these documents. I would advise my client to be very cautious, and nobody would be more served than I can say, to disclose them at this point, because it would show that there was no monkey business with the documents. And there's been a whole lot of information about a falsified footnote by one of our investigators who did a report. It has absolutely been debunked under penalty of perjury. So I would love to be able to say, look at this document. It shows that somebody got to these documents. But that's not in the city's best interest. And when you're going into a complex, potentially complex litigation to try to resolve a huge deal like this, the last thing you want to do is show the adverse party your negotiating strategy. And where there are problems in our position, why would we want to do that right now? And I absolutely believe that the public has a right to know what happened and what went wrong with this transaction. And they will know, but it has to happen in due course. Through the course of litigation, information will be coming out through discovery, through court proceedings, and the public will have the full picture of what exactly happened. But I think it would hurt taxpayers to release that information right now. And I believe that our outside counsel would be on the same page. They were very forthcoming in their analysis, because our decision makers absolutely need to have all the facts, the good facts and the bad facts, so that they can give proper guidance and make good decisions. So again, I want this information out just as much as anybody, but I want it to come out in due course so that we can protect the city of San Diego. And that will be up to our city council to make that determination after hearing all arguments for and against, and they will make that determination as to whether to release it and when.
And since you brought up the fabricated footnote, I don't want to go into great detail on that, but I do want to. I want to be clear. Is the position that that is false, full stop, or that is there a possibility that that was in an earlier draft or some other document, and that we're kind of using semantics?
It is absolutely false. And the attorneys who wrote the memo are very upset about that. That was their work product and their representation. And obviously somebody got to it and they tampered with it for what is clearly political purposes. And they have said up and down, why would we ever put such a footnote in here? And they've also said that any investigation that they needed to do, they had full ability to do that without asking anybody's permission. They signed a declaration under penalty of perjury. And that means that if they falsified anything in their declaration, they can be prosecuted for it and they can lose their license to practice law. These are two law firm partners for a reputable municipal law firm, and it would send ripple effects through municipal corporations everywhere in the state who are using this law firm if this law firm had not been clear, and they were crystal clear about what they had in that report. And why on earth would two partners put their bar licenses on the line to do that?
Okay. Cory, let me turn to you. I appreciate your patience while I ask some of those questions of Mara. Let me ask you the same question two different ways. What would you have done differently from your election if you were in Mara's position leading into the 6 weeks prior to the signing of the 101 Ash Street, sworn in 1 week prior to the signing of the 101 Ash Street deal? And going forward, if you're elected, I'm going to kind of guess at what your answer might be here. If elected this time, is it reasonable what Mara just said, or would you use your time and power and position to go and look through every deal and document that the city had under a prior administration that's coming before the council with you as city attorney and vow that this wouldn't repeat itself in any way? There's a lot to unpack, but why don't you try to tackle that?
I'm just writing a short version of your question so I remember to answer them. So bear with me. So the first part is, what would I have done differently? And by the way, thanks everybody for doing this. Let's talk about how we got here. On September 1 of 2016, mayoral staff sends an email announcing that they have to come up with a new structure because the appraisal didn't justify a straight out purchase. And those staffers said the policymakers and the public will not get behind paying more than the appraised price. What's important about that is not merely that staff is acknowledging that they're going to have to change things in order to dupe the taxpayers, but something that a lot of people have missed. 3 attorneys were CC'd on that email. 3. That means they were aware that their client was at least contemplating a fraud on the taxpayers, was at least contemplating a misrepresentation of what was going on. Then they had to line up political support for it. They sent out emails to make sure that the MEA and the firefighters union were there to support it, and they needed to get policymaker support. We now know that they met with Todd. When you go look at the committee meeting, it's clear that Todd had information that was not in the written reports and did not come from the oral presentations. It then went to the city council. The first time Todd was there, he made the motion. He wasn't there in November for the second because he'd been elected to the assembly. This was all happening. Everything that needed to happen had been done. The unions were in favor of it, the Taxpayers Association, the chamber, none of the usual suspects came out against it. So this seems like a no-brainer. It then has to go to the city attorney's office for final approval. Jan didn't sign it, and Paul Cooper didn't sign it. They could have signed it. It was left for Mara. If I had been the city attorney, I would have looked at the file on something this big. I would have looked at the file and I would have met with every lawyer involved in the process. You can see their names on the email. And I would have said, what do you know about the transaction? Any concerns about this? Have we thoroughly vetted it? Have you told anybody, if they raised concerns, I would have said, have you told anybody of your concerns? We then know there was another lawyer involved. She presided at the committee meeting. So I would have wanted to talk to all of those folks. I would want to see the file. I'm very detail oriented. I want to look at things with my own eyes, especially something of this magnitude. And it's not just the dishonesty about the price. The exculpatory language was on the first page of the contract. That is bizarre, ladies and gentlemen. That does not normally happen. And it's a huge red flag. So if you're a lawyer with experience in contracts, you know that that's sending some sort of message. Even if I didn't have the file and all I had with it was the contract, I couldn't have gotten past the middle of page 2 before I'd have been summoning all of the lawyers who worked on this into my office and said, why is this language in there? Why is the city indemnifying the seller? This is backwards. Why are we giving up everything? Especially when we think it needs a $10,000 power wash and some window caulking. Are we sure? There's got to be a memo. There's got to be an email. There's got to be an oral discussion that was provided to Mara. How did she just sign this thing and not get hung up at the bottom of page 1 and the top of page 2 and said nothing? And the answer is, people wanted this done. The unions were in favor of it. Everybody agrees that they need new digs. Nobody's against that. Michael Zucchet wrote a great column for you a few weeks ago. I love Michael. He sincerely believed that the employees needed a new office. I think everybody agrees with that generally. But there was nobody pushing back. And because this transaction had some stink on it, remember, we're buying it from one of the biggest political contributors. He's not a friend of the LGBT community. Who better to usher this through than Todd? Todd even makes a veiled joke about that in the committee meeting. If this had not been approved, it would have had to go to a new city council. The timing issues weren't timing with the deal. You could always go back to the seller and Sestera and get them to change the timing if they know the deal is otherwise fine. The timing issue is they were going to lose the point person to rush this through, because if Todd doesn't have a problem doing a deal with Manchester, who's going to ask a question? And if the unions are in favor of it, and the chamber and the Taxpayers Association and all those other suspects are not there opposing it, we need to get this done. If it goes to a new set of eyes, there might be a problem. And that is what is so typical of San Diego. And it's the reason SDSU stands out. Mara touted SDSU. SDSU is an anomaly. I'm sad.
We'll get to SDSU in a second, but so
fair enough. But
to be clear, where do you draw the line? So you assume office this year. Where do you draw the line at looking at what's important and what's not? How do you?
All important, Matt. It's all important.
So every deal that comes to your desk, you would review.
I can't look at every single deal myself. That's true. The $1,000 purchase of paper is probably not going to come across my desk. But the ethos, the work ethic, the commitment to protecting the taxpayers, that's what is set at the top. Everybody in that office will be dripping wet with that ethos, because that's what I bring to it. Mara's wrong when she says that secrecy is what best protects the city. In deals involving fraud and waste, the only thing that secrecy protects are the bad actors. The taxpayers benefit if there's evidence of fraud, if there's evidence of wrongdoing. The taxpayers would be the ones protected from transparency. We'd be protected if we had all of this information. It should all be put out there. Not just the memos between the attorneys and the clients, But the attorney work product, the memos that the lawyers wrote to their own files, the emails that they sent internally.
Let me ask you
all
specifically on all of that information. Mara just said that she would advise the council to make that decision. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, Mara, so correct me if I'm misspeaking, but that it's the council's decision to make, and she would advise them to hold on to it to keep their legal position as the case continues. So your position, Cory, is you would release it all on day one.
Not only, well,
And how do you define all? You mean every slip of paper germane to it, or are there some things you would withhold?
Well, you have to distinguish between attorney-client communications and attorney work product. The attorney-client communications are things that the council and the mayor can decide. That's up to them. It's usually up to the city council, but depending on who hired the lawyer. So whoever was the responsible branch of government as the client, that one decides. For attorney work product, memos that lawyers write to the file, emails that the lawyers share internally, I'd share that all too. I'd share it all. If a mistake was made, the public ought to know who's responsible for the mistake, and we need to make sure we don't make those mistakes again. You can't do that in secrecy.
Mara, let me ask you, so do you take a different position than what Cory just elaborated, that there are some things work-client privilege that you would withhold, but that everything else would be releasable? It sounds like you did take a different position.
Yeah, I did take a different position. And I just want to, I mean, one thing that really concerns me about what he's saying is that it's really important for your client to talk to you. And it's important to be able to talk among lawyers and come up with determinations. We do that for every memo that we issue publicly. We roundtable it. We have all the experts come in and give their 2 cents. And the draft vastly changes because people feel free to share information that needs to be considered before an opinion is given. It's really important. And we've seen throughout the history of San Diego, when trust is not with the lawyer, they're afraid that the lawyer is going to flip it and sue them or accuse them of fraud or whatever it may be. It completely stunts communication. And also, you might remember with Mayor Filner, he signed off on every purchase order. You can't operate a city of our size by having that kind of micromanagement. What Mr. Briggs never addressed is what he would do on day one. Would he reopen everything from my administration so that he would feel comfortable? Of course not. I mean, that's not realistic. And when the document comes to the city attorney's office, at that point, the deal has been made. It's been very vetted. It's been researched. There's been memos placed out there to some extent. Apparently with this one, there was just one memo. So when it's signed, it is pro forma. You are closing a deal that has been done, and you are making sure that it reflects the deal as people have negotiated it.
Let me ask you about that, because in that same La Prensa article I referenced earlier, Jan Goldsmith is interviewed, and he says that it's not pro forma, that the city attorney is the final decision maker on a deal, and that the city attorney is kind of, required almost to look at it to make sure it comports with local laws, with state laws. And if the city attorney doesn't feel that it's an appropriate contract, the city attorney can say so and send it back.
So I'm just trying to figure out how that would play out, because there's a California Supreme Court case that gives direction. And during Jan's tenure, he probably would remember, he fought very hard to make sure it didn't say as to form and legality. And his position was, at that point, at the end of a transaction, it is as to form. And we should not be saying that we don't like this and we kill it using other means to do that. And that could certainly happen, because you've got 3 independent branches. All of us have to do our own work. And he was absolutely diligent. So this change in language happened on his watch for the reason of trying to, I believe, and I'm putting words in his mouth, avoid having the attorney take responsibility for all decisions that were made. And there are decisions made at City Hall every day that I may not like, I may not agree with it, but ultimately the voters have placed a legislative body in place to represent their interests, and there is a mayor. We have a structure in place. If I found something that I thought was absolutely not legal in a contract, would I flag it? Of course I would. If I saw something that I thought maybe wasn't a good idea, I don't have the ability to say, hey, I don't like your policy decision. I'm not going to sign that. That creates mutiny. That's a constitutional crisis for the city of San Diego, to second guess these other branches of government. And when I took over, and this document was signed, his name crossed out, signed as to form, that is saying, yes, this document reflects the deal that was cut by the council, which had 2 readings, and by the mayor who executed it. It is accurate. That's all as to form says. But the system anticipates that the council is getting the guidance that they need, as is the mayor, throughout the process, and they're making good decisions. That doesn't happen at the tail end of a transaction. This had months and months, and like I mentioned earlier, this wasn't the first time the city did this deal. And you have to believe that when they cut this very same deal back in 2015 for the CCP building, that they do due diligence there. There's nothing that would have made me think, well, this is wacky. I mean, obviously this is illegal. We had just done it in 2015. And in my mind, Jan never gave any flags of not being a competent lawyer. I still believe he's a competent lawyer. And I think, sorry, pardon me, we're schooling at the same time.
We're doing it at our house too.
Okay. So there were no flags there, is my point.
So let me ask you, because Cory just said that as is in and of itself was a red flag, and that by halfway through the second page, he would have summoned every lawyer that was affiliated with this project into his office. So you're saying the exact opposite, that there were no red flags, that you looked at that and saw nothing.
No, so that's different. Is it wise or is it not wise? That's not a decision that we make. That is a policy decision. And what I have been told and what I have learned since I started to dig into this transaction is that everybody was well aware of the risks associated with as is, but they were willing to trade that for the deal, for the price that they got on a building. And at that time, the administration thought that they were getting a terrific deal. Now we know it was because they didn't do their due diligence. And had they done that, they would have seen that there were a lot of costs that were not referenced. You can ask any real estate attorney in town, including our own legal counsel who is advising on this. And this was not a deal that would have caused anybody to say, there's a legal problem here. Was it a wise deal? We're looking back now, we're saying, no, it was not a wise deal. Absolutely not. This is something that's going to take years to remedy. But my job is not to stop a deal because I think it's unwise. My job is to give them the pros and cons of legal decisions. And when things don't play out as we hope that they would, my job is to fix it. And I am putting 100% of my time into fixing this problem.
Cory, let me ask you about that. Mara's saying that the deal was unwise and that you knew that at the time, not you specifically, but that you would have known that at the time if you had looked at it as city attorney, and that it wasn't as problematic as it now looks in hindsight. Do you fundamentally disagree with that?
Are you asking Mara to restate, or are you asking me?
No, I'm asking you, Cory.
Okay,
Mara's saying that the deal was unwise, but not illegal, essentially. Again, paraphrasing her.
So why then do we have a city attorney as an independent branch of government if it's not to look at transactions and point out potential problems? If the top lawyer is going to rely on everybody else and say, well, nobody else caught it, so why should I make an issue out of it? That's a problem. It's the elected city attorney who the taxpayers sent there to be their eyes and ears, to make sure that they're protected. Jan explained it in La Prensa. If you see something, you say something. This isn't a rubber stamp. It's not perfunctory. And contrast that, I know we're going to get to SDSU, but I just can't square what I'm hearing about this contract with all the drama over SDSU, where SDSU and the city were pretty much on the same page. And Mara came out and said, it's my job independently.
In the interest of time, SDSU is actually the next line of questions, but I want to ask the board if there's any other questions they have on 101 Ash.
But let me just finish, please. My point is, you can't have it both ways. This isn't pro forma.
I had a question.
This is independent. Yeah, sorry, Andrew.
Given what we know now about the history and what the city is doing going forward, do you feel the city is making the right moves now in relation to this deal?
Based on what I know, I think the city should have started negotiations with Sistera and the bondholders a long time ago, because the relevant information was knowable long before the air pollution district started issuing asbestos notices. The problems were evident from the beginning. The problems were evident in the city attorney's files. All of that was there. All of that was available. It has snowballed, but now it's a huge snowball. Back when it was a smaller snowball, you could still see this train wreck coming. Yeah, I believe in being proactive. When you see a problem, you address it immediately. You represent the taxpayers. You don't represent the mayoral staff. You don't represent council members. You advise them. You represent the taxpayers. That's who you're ultimately responsible to, which is why I think everything should be disclosed, not just the attorney-client memos, everything in the file. All of the people are gone. They've all left. They get their pensions. Everybody's gone. The only people left are the taxpayers. Shouldn't they be protected? This secrecy protects people who were gone. Kevin Faulkner will be gone in 60 days or 90 days. So who are we protecting? The only person being protected right now who might still be there after the election is Mara Elliott. Protect the taxpayers. Open the files. And I'd have done this long ago. Everybody knows me. This is what I'm not liked about at the city attorney's office, because I believe in full transparency early.
This isn't a question, it's just an observation. In 2014, a lawyer for Sempra told the PUC that the building was not long-term sustainable.
Yeah.
How can that possibly be something that the city was unaware of as it pursued this? So I like Jan Goldsmith, and I'm a fan of him in some ways, but for him to suggest that this was handled properly in any way, in 2014, the previous major tenant told the PUC on the record in a public meeting that the building was crap. Incredible.
Chris, you can Google the testimony. I agree with you. That's why if I had been sitting in the chair, I'd want to talk to the lawyers on this. This isn't buying a ream of paper. This isn't buying new tires for the truck fleet. It's over $100 million, and the first page has a big red flag. Yeah, that would catch my attention. I would want to be talking to people.
Mara, do you want to weigh in on Andrew's question?
Yeah, there's a couple of things that I'd like to say. I do, and I enjoy working for Jan and have a lot of respect for Jan, but I find it troubling that he would say to La Prensa that I should have cut flags, because it does feel strange that this would have come to my desk after he left office if he had seen flags in either the 2015 transaction for the building I'm currently in, or for the Sempra building that can't be inhabited. Yet he did not do that. And if he did not see them or flag them, then how could he expect me to come in and find that? This wasn't even raised in the transition from him to me. I want to make that very clear. It was never referenced. And then Briggs said something interesting, that his job is to advise. I agree. I'm not the mayor, I'm not the council, and I'm not the city attorney all wrapped into one. And I think we get into some very dangerous territory when I, as city attorney, come in and pretend like I know better than anybody else. We've got policy makers, we've got a mayor who is charged with executing the wish of those policymakers and running city government. And for me to come in and say, this is unwise, I'm not going to sign off on it, again, that creates a constitutional crisis. And I think that really does set us apart in terms of who would be best for the city. Everybody plays a role in getting work done. And to try to shift it to one person is a total misunderstanding of the system of governance that our voters have put into place. If it's illegal, I am not touching it. None of us are going to sign something and lose our bar licenses. I was just given an award this year for being Public Sector Attorney of the Year for the state of California. I'm not going to compromise 26 years of ethical, competent performance because something is illegal. But when it comes to making decisions, they have every right to do that. And I can agree and I can give them every argument to consider, but ultimately they make that decision unless there's fraud or there's illegality.
Andrew, the person who's in the best position to advise the mayor and the city council on risk is the lawyer. That's what lawyers do. They advise on risk. That's why people hire lawyers. That's one of their central functions in transactions like this, to identify and mitigate risk. There's nothing policy-oriented about saying to the decision makers, this is risky. Now go look at the files that the public and the city council were provided. There are no memos identifying risk. There's no staff presentation identifying risk. In a moment, we're going to talk about another transaction where that was the centerpiece of the city attorney's presentation. Concerns about risk and protecting taxpayers. Clearly, she understands that's the role. You protect risk. This isn't a constitutional crisis. This is an accountability crisis. Now, I want to be fair. I'm not laying this whole thing at Mara's feet. I'm not. But she had the last opportunity to, at a minimum, advise the public and the decision makers of the potential risks. Jan said he was out on medical leave sometime in mid to late September. That's when this fraud gets hatched by staff. Maybe Jan was unaware that everything was looking fine. Remember, the lease to own was the second idea. Initially, it was just going to be a purchase. And then Jan goes out. So saying that Jan didn't say anything, Jan's out. How's he supposed to say anything?
That's Matt. It's really important.
Mara, we have a lot of other ground to cover. I wish we could talk about this for hours. Unfortunately, that's not the case.
That's why we need to see the city attorney's file.
But Mara, I'm going to give you the last word on this if you want to take 30 seconds.
I just want to say that most of us didn't even know Jan was out of the office. And even if Jan were out of the office, under our structure, number 2 runs it. So it's very concerning for the office to be portrayed as not having somebody running it for a couple of months. We had a full administrative team. I was not part of that team that would have run that office. So I think, saying I had a head injury and I didn't know what was happening, that's concerning, of course. None of us knew about this, but it doesn't explain the 2015 transaction that was fully vetted. So this is not a brand new transaction coming out of the woodwork in 2016. This is the same transaction with the same players in 2016 as it was in 2015.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to SDSU, Mara, we were kind of two minds on that as an editorial board, frustrated that you cost taxpayers nearly $600,000 when you tried to have Soccer City and SDSU West thrown off the ballot, appreciative of the detail and the time that you took to make sure that arrangement worked out for taxpayers. How would you assess your lawyering on SDSU West?
I did the right thing, which is what the taxpayers would expect me to do. I questioned everything. And that is sometimes a very difficult position to be in because this transaction was very emotional. People love the Aztecs. Generally, up and down, I heard, just sign the deal, give it to them. It's going to be a great thing. And I couldn't agree more. I think it's wonderful it's with SDSU, but my job is to look beyond the emotion and to really look at the deal. And there were 2 critical components of this deal. First, and you can check this with the League of California Cities, there's never been a situation where a developer puts before the voters a proposal where the developer is going to take city land so that they can develop it and that's exactly what would have happened. And I was very concerned. You have to look beyond the immediate issue and think about it globally. Because at that time, the sports arena was in dire need of care. There's been talk about doing things at Balboa Park. SeaWorld is leased land. So what does that mean? We need to question this now. And if we don't question it now, we have forever allowed those doors to open. And the League of California Cities, which represents over 500 cities, jumped in and said, oh, this is a legitimate question for municipalities. Question it. And so there's point one. But the second part is whenever we put something onto a ballot, the voter rightfully believes that it has been vetted and it's legal. And I don't think we can put something before a voter before we check it to see if it's legal. And I wanted to have that self-confidence. And then the final thing I want to point out with that, I did not make that decision, although I strongly recommended challenging it. And I had support from the council. And that's how we initiate litigation. We go to our council and we tell them the pros and the cons and why we're saying, check this now. Because there was a point where it would be too late. The unfortunate thing about that challenge is it was brought too late in the game and the judge declined to hear it. But a case came down about a month later that completely justified our position. But it's water under the bridge. It went to the voters and we did so with full confidence at that time that we had done everything we needed to do. Now, when it comes to the deal itself, you never want to be in a position where your buyer is bringing you the agreement they want you to sign. That's not good governance. And typically when the city will sell a property, we're the ones that put it together using some very standard terms. And certainly this deal could have been done within a month. That's what my opponent said, go ahead and sign it. But we looked at it and we said, whoa, the city's getting shafted and we're not gonna do that unless our client wants us to. You know, it goes back to them. So we fought really hard to make sure that there were protections. And as the California State University attorney said, these are landmark protections for the city of San Diego. I don't want another Chargers ticket guarantee. I don't want to be reading in the newspaper 10 years from now, whoa, that city attorney Elliott really blew it. She missed it. And I don't want the mayor or the council to feel like that either. So everything was brought to them. We generated, I would say, at least 20 memos on this, explaining it every step of the way. The public was impatient. Again, an emotional deal. They wanted it now. But I wanted to make sure it was done right. There was a point where I said to the team, because it seemed like we were going a certain direction, I'm sorry, guys, we're going to lose this one. You did your job. Our job is to flag everything, and we did that. And they can make the decisions they need to make, and we're going to make this deal work. We just may not be in as strong a position. The UT put an editorial out. I think it was a game changer. I was standing alone, and I was taking a lot of darts for it. And then came along the UT, and I think it gave council permission in a very emotional transaction to say, I'm going to take the time I need to get things done. It didn't buy me a lot of time, but it bought us some time. And that little period of time, that extra month we got, completely changed the agreement to put the city in a really good position. And I feel very comfortable with that transaction. And that's not always the case. This was the biggest land use deal we've had in the city of San Diego. And I think both parties kind of walked away the same, got what we wanted, not entirely happy, but we feel comfortable with the deal. And that's exactly what I wanted to do. And that's how I'll approach Ash Street and all the other things that are bound to happen, because the city is a very active place and there's always something to keep us engaged.
Cory, how would you have handled it differently?
A couple things. Number one, it shouldn't have taken a year and a half. The deal points were put in Measure G. Everybody knew what the deal points were. We wasted $15 to $20 million just in maintenance costs because it was almost a year and a half before the city attorney brought forward her version of the document. This should have happened very promptly after the results were certified. So we could have saved a lot of money. Secondly, I wouldn't have insisted on confidentiality. Remember, it's the city attorney who put everybody into under a confidential arrangement. She insisted on that. I think it was Voice of San Diego who reported on it. Why? What's there to negotiate? Measure G told us the deal points. It was based on an appraisal that already existed. There were no secrets. The only things to be hashed out were technical details. That's it. This could have been done much sooner, and it should have been done much sooner. Now, let's also remember why the city council felt confident. This wasn't just the city attorney's office's work product. The city had to go spend $400,000 on outside lawyers because we'd had a whole bunch of other land use deals and other bad contracts that had been called into question, approved by this city attorney administration, that nobody had any confidence in. City council wants to get rid of that advisory role. We had to spend $400,000. And what was the big issue? Why were we holding this up? Over the pure water program. That was it. Remember, we have to protect pure water. I'm probably the only lawyer on this call who's read the environmental impact report for the pure water program. What does it say about the Mission Valley site? It says that the infrastructure for the pure water program runs south of the San Diego River. Well, the San Diego River is the southern part of this project. SDSU wasn't buying San Diego River. So if pure water runs south of the river, the infrastructure wasn't the hangup. This was a good reason to differentiate all of the other transactions from what it should look like. This is what a final agreement should look like. It just shouldn't have had all the drama. We shouldn't have had to hire outside lawyers. We shouldn't have had to wait a year and a half. And it shouldn't be a standout in comparison to everything else. Just take what she said about the good parts of 101 Ash, or of this one, and what she did, and just compare it to 101 Ash. Why was it not important back then, before she approved it, to do everything she just said? So that's what we want.
Looks like we lost Cory. Mara, do you want to say anything in response to that? I don't want to belabor SDSU West. We talked about it a lot in our March interview, to be honest.
We did. I just want to clear up some misstatements. Do you want me to wait for him to get on, or shall I proceed?
In the interest of time, why don't you proceed?
Okay, it took 13 months before we were, from the time that the voters passed the measure until we had a first draft of the purchase and sale agreement to the council. I just want to be clear about that. The confidentiality issue is I didn't want the negotiation to be impacted by public pressure. And if you have a team, and SDSU was very good at this, at putting messages out there and getting the public riled up, it was a big distraction. So that was why we felt it was important. But like I said, we bent over backwards with the public hearings and the memos to really give solid information to the public, because everybody had an interest in this. Everybody was watching. So that's how I chose to handle it. I wanted to make sure that the information was solid information. It wasn't just publicity that was being garnered to put people in a corner. Deal points are not equal to legal terms. Like there was a structure that was approved by the voter, but the terms that you write into the agreement are everything. That's going to guide the transaction for years to come. So that's a lot of work. And then the pure water program, you can look at one of the final memos we did describes the 14 hottest issues. And that was just part of it. There was a lot of stuff where we thought we're not going to make a mountain out of a molehill. It was far more than pure water. And I would encourage the editorial board to take a look at that if you want to see what the truth was. Although pure water is such an important element of the city's future because we're so water dependent. I wanted to protect that, and I still want to protect that program. And then finally, the outside lawyer, it's like buying an insurance policy, because I feel that we got great lawyers, but sometimes I love when my secretary rereads my memo. She'll always catch a typo. She'll always catch something I didn't see. And I just think that's the way life is. It's really smart to have somebody oversee your work. So that's what we hired them for. We hired actually 2 law firms. And there were interests for the taxpayers and there were interests for the ratepayers. It's a complex property. I hired someone to look on behalf of the ratepayers because I wanted to make sure nobody would say that we weren't protecting them and we were only protecting the taxpayers. And then I hired a firm just to look at our work on the taxpayer part. And that was a 500-page document. It was a lot of work, so you could miss something. And I think that what they brought to the table was very helpful in getting the city a deal that we all feel very comfortable about. I would do that again. And I think the diligence that you saw with how I handle SDSU West is exactly what I would have done had I been on the front end of the transactions that are now hopefully I won't be saying transactions, that is causing us so much concern and will be taking so much time for the next couple of years.
Thanks. I want to move
Thank
on, but
you.
Cory, I want to, you lost the part of that call. She kind of went through your points to rebut them. So I'm gonna give you 30 seconds to respond to that, but also broadly, I wonder if you could tell us when you would use outside counsel, under what circumstances. Mara kind of laid out, generally speaking, how she would approach the use of outside counsel, which obviously costs a pretty penny.
Go
ahead.
If our staff doesn't have the expertise, we need to use outside counsel. That's the test. If we're not comfortable signing off, saying I don't have the skill or the experience to do it, we need outside counsel. The taxpayers deserve that. The one issue I would point out on SDSU, this is the beginning of a relationship. This isn't the end. These were the wedding vows. There are going to be bumps in the road. The spouses will probably need counseling over the years to help remain on the same page. There's nothing in that agreement that includes dispute resolution issues. I wrote a memo to the council and I said, look, put dispute resolution provisions in it. I think Vivian Moreno read it because she asked about it. As part of what we do, we have to anticipate problems. And to avoid drama like we have over 101 Ash, prudent lawyers put dispute resolution provisions into contracts. That remains missing from the SDSU contract. And if anybody thinks that SDSU and the city aren't going to have conversations down the road about how to do implementation, then they just shouldn't be in this job, because that's how these land deals work, especially when it's the beginning of a long, beautiful relationship.
Speaking of the beginning of what's that, Mara? I'm sorry.
Yeah, there are dispute resolutions in there. We were asked about that at council, and we walked through the agreement and showed council exactly where they are. Of course, that is litigation is a failure. So we always try to resolve things short of litigation.
Do you recant that criticism, Cory?
No, go look at the dispute resolution provisions. They call for litigation.
Okay. Thank you. Moving on, I think you gave a good segue to another beginning of a long and protracted and prime real estate deal, sports arena site. Mara, how can we trust that your office will give sound legal advice on that?
Well, I'm not at all concerned about the legal advice. I have looked at all the advice that our office has given to the mayor so far. This has not yet come to the council. It's been a very public process because it was brought out to the public for information gathering purposes before anything is given to the council in terms of an agreement.
I don't know how, not to interrupt you, but I don't know how public it was. I think the public had 10 days to comment, and a lot of this has taken place behind closed doors without knowing the merits of the two proposals.
Yeah, whatever we sign off on, I'm going to be comfortable with. Did I like the process? No, that's a wholly different issue. And I think that there should have been a precursor where there's more engagement. I believe that the public has a lot of opinions about that particular area. I don't like the timing, but those are not reasons that I could say you can't go forward with this, Mr. Mayor. He still has a right to be mayor until he is replaced by somebody else. And the council has a right to ask very difficult questions about the process. If we do a memo, we may need to. I have to figure out whether that's necessary or not. We usually do a memo to explain a process to the public and to help the council in making their determinations. But ultimately, they're going to have to ask some very difficult questions of the mayor. As for the legal advice on this, it is absolutely sound. This is a typical RFP process where we have requested bids from outside providers. We've said, show us what you got. The mayor's team made a determination based on objectives that were described in the RFP. We don't see any problems with that. Is there going to be an unhappy person that did not get the deal? Probably. And it could lead to protests. It could lead to litigation. That's all very normal in city business. But there is no red flag at this point other than concerns that it moved very quickly and I would have liked more public discussion.
Cory, what do you think of the process so far, and how would your legal advice on Sports Arena site unfold?
So once again, I begin from the position of nothing hurts the public when there's full transparency. The city attorney's office would be approving the RFPs that come through, that go out to these bidders. Always in the beginning, what I want to know is, how is the public being kept in the loop about this? What are their opportunities to participate? Why is that? I don't have the ability as the attorney to influence the final product. I do have the ability to influence the process. The biggest problem that the public has with its government right now at every level, you can think about this nationally, you can think about it locally with the county COVID data, you can think about it on 101 Ash. Nobody trusts the government. Everybody is secretive because they're all playing CYA. And nobody's paying protect the public, protect the taxpayers. So I want there to be full transparency. There's nothing that prevents the city attorney's office from writing a public memo to the mayor, to the city council, that says, I encourage you to include the public early and often, even before you put forward your RFP. Now, they don't have to take the advice. That's one of the prerogatives of being the decision maker, is you get to ignore the lawyer. But a government lawyer's job is to make sure that everybody is aware of the opportunities, of the pros and the cons, because it benefits nobody when everybody is suspicious about the final deal. It's one thing to lose fair and square. It's another thing to lose because you think the system is rigged. We're watching this play out at other levels of government, and we do it time and again in San Diego. We did it on the Sandag tax when they were lying about it. And yet we need to do something to achieve our climate goals, to get people from A to B, and nobody trusts anybody. This is systemic. There's a systemic failure of trust because the people in a position to help the public understand what's going on drop the ball constantly. They either don't execute or they mis-execute. If you don't execute, you can't be criticized, except way down the road. If you mis-execute, at least public people can see it and they can call you on it and you can correct and fix it the next time. But we do all this stuff in secrecy and then we jump through our you-know-whats to rationalize what we've done and tell everybody how wonderful it is for them. If it was so wonderful, we'd have told them up front what we were doing. And we'd have included them in the process. Again, this isn't, what's really bizarre about this whole dynamic is that Mara sounds like the lawyer representing private people. And I'm the lawyer in private practice. She's trying to protect private decision makers. The city attorney's job is to protect the public. That's why there's nothing the public can't know, with some limited exceptions. Yes, it's one thing on criminal prosecutions. Yes, there are personnel issues. Yes, when you're in the throes of litigation, certain things, you keep those cards to your chest. But the vast majority of things that we do as government lawyers should be to make sure that everybody understands what's going on in government so the public can be included. Go read the preambles to the Brown Act and the Public Records Act and Article 1, Section 3 of the California Constitution. The public hasn't yielded their control over their government. And that's what we're doing on all of these things. So, Matt, I see you ready to shut me up. I'll just say it this way. The public should have been included early. The mayor should have been advised early. And the best way for the city attorney to demonstrate that he or she is on the public side is to issue a public memo saying, I encourage you to do it this way. And here are all the options for you to achieve your goal while keeping the public and everybody else in the loop.
Let me shift gears again. I appreciate you knowing my tell. I was about to do that.
Yeah.
About the public, right? So for months, the public has been protesting in the streets about racial justice and social justice and police brutality. And I asked both of you guys to write op-eds for us about the future of policing a couple months ago, and I appreciate that. Let me ask you a broader question about how this moment in time has affected your view as the person who either is or would be prosecuting misdemeanors in this city, a lot of which have to do with issues of disproportional arrests, racial inequities. Has this moment made you reconsider, rethink, or actually change how you approach that part of the job? And Mara, why don't you go first since you're in the position now?
Thank you, Matt. I just need to quickly resolve something he said from the prior question. As a good example, the franchise agreement is going forward, and that's a 50-year agreement that's coming to an end in January, on January 17th of 2021. When it is appropriate, I will speak, speak up and remind them that they have an obligation to really look at the details and not rush to agreements. But I don't think that it's appropriate for me to mother the council and the mayor and nag them and say, hey, I don't like how you did this. I don't like how you did this. I always go back to the law. This is what the law requires. This is what the law allows. Now, this is normal. All of our stuff comes to the public through hearings. So that I just wanted to correct that, because I think that that type of an approach is paralysis. And I don't think we could progress as a city. And every time we took the temperature or we nagged our client like, well, you didn't do this, we wouldn't get anything done. This is a city that's moving very quickly. Now, as for your question, Matt, when my mom came to this country with her mother, they went to a little town called Douglas, Arizona, and it's right on the border. And they had come to this country under very difficult circumstances. Douglas did not embrace Mexicans or African Americans. And my mother could not use the bathroom or the water faucet that all the other children did. And I grew up hearing about that story, and I would say that that had a great impact on the reason I wanted to practice law. I'm the first in the family to go to college. I went to law school for the purpose of doing public service and speaking out for people. And I've proudly done that for 26 years, and I love it. But in my mind is always the experience that they had and how difficult it was to assimilate into this country. My grandmother had a 3rd grade education, and they made it. And they got my mom married, and she's got 2 kids, and we both have done well. And I know she's very proud of us. My father was a longshoreman. I get the issues. They're very personal to me. And I don't want to hear in my city that anybody feels like they're less than somebody else or they're not given a fair shake. And I've worked so hard in our office to try to make sure that we are giving people opportunities to get back on their feet, because life happens. And we prosecute low-level offenses. People make mistakes. We have a lot of college kids coming through the system, you can imagine, with open bottles and that kind of thing. I mean, the last thing I want to do is give them a record. So we create programs so that we can help people out of the criminal justice system. And I am so invigorated by this national conversation that really does seem to be moving the dial. And I've spent an awful lot of time talking with communities, because I often don't know everything. I know that. And I think smart people ask good questions. And I wanted to hear from them what we're doing right and what we could do more of. And what I'm hearing is, thank you for creating these programs so that we can house people who have drug problems and are creating, who are getting into trouble. Usually they're committing crimes to support their habit. And I want to do something about that. And we have very effective programs that do that. We bought this dilapidated hotel because what we have found is that you have to get these people out of the circumstances they're in. They're just going to return and they're going to recommit, because that's where they came from. That's what they do. And Cory sued to prevent us from ever opening it. And that is absolutely the silliest, most ridiculous approach to the criminal justice system. If we're trying to give people a bed and services and we're going to clear their record and give them a fresh start, help us do this. Don't sue us to prevent this from happening. It is insane. We have worked hard to get people off the gang injunction list. I worked with the chief because it was important to both of us to do that. I've asked every division within our office to take a look inside. because I think it is very foolish for anybody to say, no, this isn't an issue in our office, not in our office. And I want to make sure that we can say that with absolute confidence. And we've been working with Stanford University to create a program which we're getting ready to use. It does a second check of all cases that are referred to us, and it takes out distinguishing characteristics like your color or your age or where you're from, so that you can really see if there was a crime committed without all the biases that human beings have come through their minds. I created the city attorney's first chief diversity officer as soon as I took over. Again, I want to make sure everybody feels respected and part of the conversation and is treated with dignity. But I think my message is that I think one of my strengths is I listen and I respond, and I try to create policies that are going to move the city forward and are responsive to the things that concern us most as a community. And it breaks my heart if anybody feels like they weren't given a fair shake. And I'm going to always make sure that we're doing everything we can so that people have confidence in the system. We're working to establish the Office on Race and Equity. I think that was a brilliant idea by Councilmember Montgomery. I worked with the mayor to ensure that we could do a diversity study so we can ensure that communities aren't falling behind, which often happens to marginalized communities. And I offered to pay for it out of my budget because it was that important to me, and I had been trying to get him to do it for a long time. The request has been out there for 10 years. We finally got that done. And we have a robust diversity and inclusion program within my own office where we're educating everybody from support staff, because they all speak for me, to the attorneys about race and culture and religion and LGBTQ issues. Just, I want to make sure we're as fully educated and open to suggestions and ideas and doing things better. So I feel absolutely incentivized to make sure that we're leaving no stone unturned. It is personal and it matters to me with this city too.
Thank you,
The issue of short-term vacation rentals, to me, kind of crystallizes the debate between you two over what the city attorney's office should be, whether it should be aggressive and trying to lead the way or whether it should defer to policymakers. But I can't believe either you are satisfied with this current status quo in which so many people are gigantically frustrated with this system and the city council can't make up its mind.
Yeah.
Should the city attorney's office do more?
Let's put a pin in that for a second because I want to hear Cory's response on the racial issues, and Cory specifically, since Mara mentioned that lawsuit, if you want to address that as well.
Sure. Let me just also quick detour. She began her response. Paralysis by public disclosure and inclusion, I don't see that as paralysis. I see that part of the process. Let me answer your question by telling you how I approach this issue. My brother Kurt had a drug and gambling problem. He went through the system, and he was fortunate enough to have a prosecutor, a defense attorney, and a judge who believed in giving people a second chance. And so Kurt was convicted. He had to make amends, had to get his record expunged. I'm going to cry telling you this. I can't help it. And when he was all done, he went to law school and he passed the bar. And one day I was trying a case. I just happened to be trying the case out of county in front of the judge who convicted my brother. And the case ended, and I'm packing up my stuff and walking out, and Judge Plotkin said, "Mr. Briggs, how's your brother?" He hadn't seen him since he sentenced him. And I said, "Your Honor, he just passed the bar." And Judge Plotkin said, "Tell him congratulations, and then I'd like to be the judge who swears him in." Everybody deserves that chance. Everybody. My brother got lucky. He's now a very successful criminal defense attorney up in Northern California. So that's how I look at this issue. I'm not a criminal defense lawyer, not been a prosecutor. But I've seen up close and personal what the system can do when it's done right. I was concerned about these issues before I threw my hat in the ring to run for city attorney. Why did it take a tough re-election campaign to get this city attorney's office to focus on making sure that its prosecutions are not compounding the bias in policing, for which there has been a mountain of data even before December 12th of 2016? Why did it take a re-election campaign? Why did it take George Floyd being murdered? That shouldn't have happened. This is, again, an issue of being proactive. Let's talk about getting rid of bias. Mara has earned herself quite a reputation on the issue of gun violence restraining orders. Good for her. However, if you're a Black San Diegan, you're about 2.5 times as likely to face a GVRO as anybody else in San Diego. And she's going to say something like, well, those are all referred by the family. That's not true. They have to be prosecuted in the name of police officers. There had to be a legislative change recently to undo that. Mara had to go ask the courts to fix a bunch of the party names and cases because officers were showing up as litigants. So it was the system prosecuting people. And yet there's clear bias, even in the city attorney's office. You can't snap your finger and get rid of it when it's systemic. We all know that. But you have to be willing to hold up a mirror and ask the hard questions and be transparent about it. And yet it wasn't until we're in the midst of a campaign and then heaven, that video is horrific. We should have been talking about this 3 months into 2017. And it wasn't until 2020 that we were talking about it. On the issue of the hotel in the South Bay, yeah, David Alvarez opposed it, the community opposed it. Why? Because they were taking away part of a low-income community's economy. And what did the community say? Fine, if you want to take the place, just replace it so that you're not impairing our ability to have family members at the holidays, our ability to have a beach-oriented tourism industry. Just provide something to make up for it. The Coastal Commission agreed. Nobody was ever opposed to finding shelter for misdemeanors. It does beg the question, why would you put them in the South Bay when the probation officers and the service providers and the social workers are downtown? But okay, we'll call that a bad judgment call. That's the reason. The community wanted an equal opportunity. This was a zero-sum game, and it doesn't have to be that way.
Let's, in the interest of time, Cory, let me stop you there and get to the short-term vacation rentals question, because I do.
I'm sorry, Matt. I have to clear the record. I'll be brief if it's okay with you.
20 seconds.
Okay, all right. Black Americans are 10 times more likely than white Americans to die by gun homicide, and 14 times more likely than white Americans to be injured in a gun assault. It is a huge issue in the African American community. More than 50% of the people against whom we get GVROs are white, older men. And we were the first in the state to use GVROs, and it was unclear in the law whether we had to bring those under the name of the police department or how. That's the explanation. There's no ulterior motive or hiding of some kind of an agenda. I just want to be real clear. GVROs are valuable tools to keep the public safe.
Thanks.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you. Let me then turn to you, Mara, for the short-term vacation rentals question, because it does seem you have a wide difference there. Why can't the city figure that out? Why does it take so long? Why isn't your office doing more? And Chris, I don't know if you had a more specific question in mind there.
Yeah, this is a priority, and it was when I ran for office. I think that communities have a right to know what the rules are and when they can rent their homes out or when they can rent a room out. And I think that it's a fairness issue. Communities also are entitled to be able to have the peace and enjoyment of their neighborhoods. So within a couple of months of taking office, I put a memo out to the public for the purpose, and I was very clear of doing this, of trying to get the council and mayor to finally resolve the issue of reasonable regulations on short-term rentals. This has been a discussion that's been happening since 2007 during the Aguirre administration. And we don't have any rules on the books that say what a short-term rental is or how to enforce it. And in 2018, during the fall, as you might recall, the council did finally adopted short-term rental regulations, but they bowed down to the pressure that was being exerted on them by Airbnb. And there were some great speeches from the dais saying, I will be back and we will bring some more regulations forward. That didn't happen until recently. And District 2 through Councilmember Campbell has a proposal and a great deal of courage in doing that. Because if you drive around her community, you'll see people are threatening recall, calling her a liar. It's an ugly battle. And we have rolled up our sleeves and we are getting it done. And we're working with her. And what I like is she's working with the community and she's working with the industry so we can get something done. There is absolutely no excuse that San Diego, a large city like us, the 8th largest in the nation, cannot enact reasonable regulations when so many other large cities have been able to do that. And it is extremely frustrating. I'm not the policymaker and I've been very careful about not stepping into that role. I will do whatever I can to help the policymakers get reasonable regulations enacted as soon as possible. And as soon as Dr. Campbell came to us and said, I'm working on this, I made sure she had a lawyer there from step one. Get it done. We will do whatever we can to get this before the voters. We just prosecuted a nuisance property in Bankers Hill that happened to be a short-term rental. That's not a short-term rental prosecution. It was based on 1.5 years of evidence under the nuisance code, and then a whole bunch of other theories just to do something for a community that was just bleeding and crying out for help because nobody will do anything. My opponent has said that he will go ahead and send a cease and desist letter to all 16,000 operating short-term rentals, and then magically they will stop. No, that's not going to happen, and especially if he carries through his promise to get rid of our criminal division, because they're the ones who prosecute this case. He's going to say, well, I'll use the civil litigation division. 16,000 cases, that is a terrible use of public resources, and you will never get to the bottom of that list, and it's a ridiculous approach. But also, mind you, he doesn't think the civil advisory division should exist because he fully supports that the council should go out and hire their own attorney. So I don't know what he's running for, but he's going to get rid of the criminal division and then he wants to get rid of the civil. So I don't understand what that enforcement will look like, but there is no excuse for San Diego to not be able to adopt reasonable regulations so that everybody understands what the rules are and that our communities are restored so people can again enjoy their property. And I think most people, if they know what the rules are, they're going to follow them. People generally are pretty good. So let's work with our communities and give them the regulations that they've been asking for 13 years now.
Cory, but set aside the comments on the future of the office and criminal cases, but short-term vacation rentals, is that true? You would send 16,000 cease and desist orders? How would you handle it?
So, but before I answer that question, let me just point out the obfuscation here. We already have regulations for short-term vacation rentals. They're prohibited. We have a permissive code. They're not expressly authorized. For that reason, they are prohibited, just like any other use that's not authorized. The discussion about regulations is not to prohibit them. It's to allow some level of short-term vacation rental activity. That's what has not passed the legislative hurdle. We already have a prohibition. So let's make sure things are clearly framed. The way I would approach it is that I would send cease and desist letters to all of the known short-term vacation rentals. The auditor said it's 16,000. Okay, 16,000. Let's get that list. If there are duplicate entries, obviously we're not sending 2 letters. And then I will start with the biggest fish. We know who the Airbnb, VRBO, HomeAway, we know who those folks are. Those companies are conspiring to facilitate illegal activity. So under the same statute that Mara is using, without mayoral or council approval to go after Instacart or Uber or Lyft, that same statute would allow her, if she wanted to go after those big fish. We're talking about 1 or 2 lawsuits against people who are just as big as Instacart and Uber and Lyft. So clearly the office is capable of doing it. I just think we should have a focus on protecting San Diegans on San Diego issues before we go experimenting on statewide issues for the purpose of grabbing headlines. Let's focus on San Diegans and their needs. And so you go after the big ones first, and they will have the best lawyers. And if those lawyers are able to persuade the courts that these things have been lawful all along and that there's been a fundamental misreading of the municipal code, great, we'll know that in short order. The city of Los Angeles just got an injunction against a short-term vacation rental a couple of days ago. They're similarly situated to San Diego. This can be done if there's political will. So that's why I say I go after the biggest fish first. I'm not talking about filing 16,000 lawsuits. Mara's just making a straw man argument. I'm talking about going after the 2 or 3 biggest fish and stopping them. And then you work your way down.
Chris or anyone else got a follow-up on that?
Can I add one thing, Matt, please? I'll do 20 seconds if you give it to me.
Sure, 15.
With permits, you can instantly address the situation. With litigation, people don't see relief for up to a couple of years. And I don't think that's what people are asking us to do. They want permits in place so those can be revoked and short-term rentals can be closed down when they're not good actors. There are no regulations on the books at all. I have no idea what Mr. Briggs is talking about.
Matt, this is nonsense. She went into Instacart and got an injunction within a couple months of filing the lawsuit.
That's a civil lawsuit.
You can go in and get an injunction.
Laura?
We're going to run out of time, and I know we wanted to discuss a couple other things, so I'm just going to ask you to quickly address another question that also relates to enforcement, and that is enforcement during this pandemic. As a couple days ago, even on Labor Day, there were images on NBC with San Diego police giving out citations for gatherings at Mission Beach. And we've seen some of these protests with people with no masks. Right now, people are out of jobs. The courts are not operating in full mode. So even if you did enforce, the fact that people would actually be able to pay any kind of citations or get to court to deal with it is another issue. But if you could each just say in a minute or so, what are your thoughts on citations during this pandemic?
I guess I can start. I think ultimately punishment is not the goal. We want people to respond in a healthy way to the orders that are being issued by people who know far more than we do. So we're trying to gain compliance. We couldn't possibly prosecute everybody who is within 6 feet of each other or not wearing a mask. So I have used the office to send messages on a larger scale. And a good example is the party house we talked about. That was a COVID problem, as was the gym that we recently worked with to close it down. So I think the approach has to be educating the public, getting compliance. And if we're unable to get compliance and it's a serious enough issue, we need to prosecute it. But it would be absolutely unrealistic for us to try to prosecute everybody who's violating the current public health orders.
Now, Laura, if we know that people are breaking the rules, everybody should be subject to prosecution. Those are the rules. I don't know about any particular case, so I'd have to know about the particular case. That said, you can't legislate stupid. Some people are just going to be stupid, and we're going to have to deal with that in other ways. The legal system shouldn't be the backstop for every single thing that's wrong. It is for many things, and appropriately so. Some of this problem is a function of the lack of trust, and there being missed messages about what people should do, what the law requires, how you find out about it. I mean, there was a time when public health orders were changing daily. And if you paid attention in your legal philosophy class, you would know that people like Lon Fuller for many, many years have been saying you can't change rules just like that on people and expect them to change and punish them for it. So I tend to agree with Mara in a lot of ways on this issue, right? The way you're going to get compliance is by, you're going to have to set some examples with folks, but at the same time, there needs to be a public education campaign. You can't expect the court system to get people in real time to be as responsible as I think a majority of folks believe they need to be.
Thank you both. And I'm glad to see you agree on one thing.
Let me ask you both about an individual weakness, at least as I see it. You both bring strengths to the table, but it seems to me that to win this election, you're going to have to win over some people who are skeptics. Cory, I think I used the term rabble-rouser in March when we met earlier. I'm going to set that term aside, and just on the issue that you filed so many lawsuits against the city, why should someone trust you to represent it now and not think that you're better on the outside than on the inside?
Well, if people think I'm better on the outside, I can't change their mind. What I'm trying to do is demonstrate that we don't have good enough on the inside. The reason I've been successful, Mara will say, oh, he files all these lawsuits. Yeah, and we're successful at it. And judges conclude at the end that we did a public service, and that's how it is that I get paid. I got to win and prove to a judge that we provided a public service. The city breaks a lot of rules and the taxpayers pay. If I'm on the inside, I'm not changing my focus. My focus is to protect taxpayers against wrongdoing. It's far more proactive. Right? I think it was Roger Hedcock on UTTV at one point, he interviewed me and he says, why don't you just run for office? And I wasn't going to do it at the time. And last year, some people persuaded me. It's the same ethic. It's the same loyalty to taxpayers and the public that has me doing this. So the reason I'm the better choice is because my whole career has been protecting taxpayers. On top of that, my whole career has been subject to malpractice. If I screw up, I either have to write a check to my client or I call my carrier. I've never been immunized from the consequences of bad decisions. Only government lawyers get to go to sleep at night without having to worry about whether they're doing the right thing. Because they face no consequences. The worst thing that happens is they lose their job and they keep their pensions. Not in private practice. In private practice, I always have to make sure that I'm not doing anything. I have to make sure every stone's been turned over. I can't change that after 25 years. That is the inertia. That is the trajectory of this legal career.
And we talked about your record last time we spoke in the spring, but I think you're batting 500.
I think it's above 500, but it depends on when you take the snapshot.
So the point is you've lost some cases and judges haven't always spoke highly of you. Want to address your record?
The one time judges didn't speak highly of me was a mistake. And this was the headline in your newspaper, written by David Garrick. They made a mistake. They corrected themselves a month later. They had some concerns. Those concerns were referred to the state bar, and I was cleared twice. So yeah, people raise issues. Thank God we have those forums to have this stuff aired, because if we didn't, people would just throw stuff out and they wouldn't know that stuff has been resolved and been investigated by neutral people and concluded that nothing wrong was done. So yeah, if you do this long enough, you're going to make some enemies. If you do this long enough, some judges are going to make mistakes. They corrected themselves. I give them credit for that. State bar looked at it. I give them credit for that. I have no problems subjecting myself to scrutiny. If I did, I wouldn't be the candidate in this race who's advocating for a radical transformation in the office's attitude towards transparency. I want everybody to be able to look over my shoulder in real time. And if they see something, if they disagree with, say something. I'm not afraid of that. I've never been afraid of it. So that's why I think folks who might be skeptical should say, well, if he's going to be transparent and that's been his history, and these accusations that have come up, have been corrected or looked at, and you got a clean bill of health, heck, that's a lot better than what we've got right now, where it's a culture of secrecy and a culture of cover-up and a culture of distrust.
Thanks, Cory. Mara, let me ask, the question to you is about your judgment, which our board has raised questions about. You know, we've obviously been giving you some praise for many of the things you've done, only starting with gun violence restraining orders. But on SDSU West, at least initially, with issues dealing with the media, most recently having someone in your staff threaten a reporter at NBC San Diego, part of a history of interactions with the media that have been suspect, including the bill with Ben Wayso. And I don't want to really go into chapter verse of all of that, but talk to me a bit about your judgment and why voters should trust that you do have good judgment. And one specific issue, maybe the biggest issue, is your relationship with the council, which has frayed to the point of you know, many of them refusing to come to closed sessions with you. So talk a bit about your judgment and your relationships with the council and the media.
Yeah, so there's a lot of parts to your question. The first, with the media, I was a journalist in high school. I was one of the editors of my school paper. I fully appreciate and respect the press. I have a duty, independent of that, to protect the city. And there's information, I mean, this is a great example about Ash Street. My job is to argue and get the best possible outcome from a really bad deal. And to show everybody our vulnerabilities and our strengths is not good for the taxpayer. And we were trying to figure out, there's also a culture at City Hall where I sometimes believe people are working more for their friends and their special interests than they are for the taxpayers. And I will always do what I believe to be right for the taxpayers, even if it puts myself in peril. And I've done that over and over again. And in this, as you know, 3 years ago, we had a council member give a confidential report to, it was a full analysis to a lobbyist. And I and the DA did training, we issued memos, we changed our practices to try to ensure that would never happen again. And then it did. It just happened again. And during the pandemic, it's been very challenging. I think everybody's very frustrated, tired, scared. And we sent materials to the council using what we believe to be a very trusted system where you would enter your password in and couldn't print it or forward it or anything like that. And lo and behold, it happened again. So I gave direction to my criminal division to do an investigation, and things moved fast. And I regret that that letter was ever issued. I immediately called the persons to whom it was issued and apologized profusely and assured them that they were not under investigation. And that was not the intent. The intent was to try to change a culture and try to make sure that people are fulfilling their fiduciary duty. As for transparency, the public knows what I'm doing. Look at SDSU. We've never issued so many memos. Everything was done publicly. I am happy to always do that. I'm often the person returning phone calls to people that call my office. I sit with the council every Tuesday during normal times for purposes of forming that relationship and hearing directly from the public. I go to the public comment session. I think what happened a couple of weeks was the culmination of a lot of frustration. And over the last 2 years, the council has been on the receiving end of deals that they didn't know about, that they heard about at the very last second, that they felt trapped into saying yes to. And there's a great deal of frustration at City Hall. I am the most visible person because I worked so closely with both the mayor's office as well as the council. And I think I was on the receiving end of that. And what I want the council to know, we are 100% there for them. I just, in fact, we just advertised a position today. It's an assistant city attorney position. It's council relations and independent departments. And they will have their own go-to person that's going to help them get things done. Right now, they're at the mercy of the mayor's office. So if the mayor doesn't want to send staff to committee meetings, the council's completely paralyzed and unable to do their job. I hear them. I welcome criticism. And I think one of my strengths is hearing it and responding to it and acknowledging when we have a problem. Yeah, we have a problem, and I want to fix it. And this is the olive leaf I am extending to the council. If they feel they're not getting the attention that they need, I think this is going to change it. If it doesn't change it, I'm sure they're going to let me know and we'll try something else. As for closed session, I contacted 14 other local government agencies here in San Diego and said, what are you guys doing for closed session to communicate this important information? And 65% of them said we give verbal reports only. So what we did was not unusual. And I've been practicing law for public entities for over 20 years. And in some entities, we only gave verbal reports. I will always make sure, as we have done in the past, that if somebody wants a briefing, we will offer it. In fact, we proactively contact impacted districts and say, hey, this litigation concerns you. It's coming to closed session next week. Would you like a briefing? That's always been the case. But I think what you saw is a lot of frustrations that boiled over, and I happened to be on the receiving end of it. I took it seriously. I fixed what I believe the problems were. And I'm looking forward to rolling up our sleeves and working together, because we've got some tough times ahead of us with the pandemic. We've got a lot of people in our city that are losing jobs and can't feed their families. And I want the mayor and the council to focus on that, not on infighting. It's not going to fix anything for the people that need us most at a time they need us most.
A quick follow-up. You said 2/3 of 14 local agencies give verbal reports. How big are those? Are those water districts? I mean, the complexity and scope of the arrangements that you all discuss in closed session, I imagine, is at a different level than.
Yeah, and it depends. For the most part, what we go to closed session for is personal injury, inverse condemnation. So it's typically kind of your average run-of-the-mill things. I contacted the county. There's a group called the City Attorney Association of San Diego, and it's got airport council, port council, cities. And we all stay in very close contact because we usually like to work together and do things somewhat the same. So I reached out to that. Most of them were cities that I spoke with. I did talk with the port and I did talk with the county.
Okay. I appreciate you guys staying over. This is an important race, and I'm glad we're giving it its due diligence. Let me ask one more question and then open it to the board for any others before I give you closing statements. Appointed or elected city attorney, what's the path forward? And let's talk now about what Mara raised, which is, kind of cutting the department so that the prosecutions go to the district attorney. And Cory, why don't you go first? What is your vision for the office in those terms?
The voters decide whether they want to have an appointed or an elected city attorney. There are arguments both ways. I will defer to the voters.
What do you believe is proper?
Proper, or which one?
Which one do you support?
Taxpayers.
Yeah, which one do you support?
It's like the strong mayor system. It depends on who's in the office. If you have a good lawyer who's faithful to the taxpayers, you want that person to be elected by the voters. If you have a bad lawyer, you want that person to be appointed so that the city council or the mayor, whoever appoints them, can get rid of that lawyer quickly. It's a function of who's in the office. That's why I defer to the voters on that one. What I said on the criminal issue has been distorted here today. What I said is, if the voters decide to get rid of the civil component, that's if, it's a conditional. If the voters decide that, they then should be asked whether they also want to get rid of the criminal. And what I said is that I would float a charter amendment past the city council to see whether they'd let the voters decide that. Why? Because the budget is about $15 million for criminal enforcement. And we already have a district attorney who does misdemeanors everywhere else in the county, and the public pays property taxes to the DA. So why would we pay locally here in the city for something that we're already paying for at the county level?
So
I want to ask the voters that question. I didn't say to abolish it. I said, ask the question. Have the conversation.
So to be clear, because I don't want to get into the weeds on this issue. So you do not feel one way or the other, elected or appointed, for a job that for an elected job you're running for, you don't think it should stay elected?
I think that if I'm the city attorney, it should be elected because I care about the taxpayers and the voters first. Generically speaking, if you have that person in the office, yeah, it's better for taxpayers. But if you're going to have a weak, dishonest, or untrusted city attorney, it's better to have an appointed system where you can get rid of that person quickly. It's a function of who's in the office. That's why you need to have this debate publicly and see what's the public most comfortable with. What trade-off do they want to make? I see the arguments both ways.
Mara, do you have a position, elected versus appointed?
Yeah, I do. And I think that has evolved having held the position. So we have had an elected city attorney since the 1880s. And we looked at the history, it's fascinating. And it was a very deliberate decision by the voters. They wanted to ensure that the city attorney was accountable to their interests. And what you see repeatedly when you look at the history is a concern that if the attorney is appointed by a politician, that attorney will go into self-preservation mode and say what it is that their client wants them to say. Because when they don't, they're at risk of losing a position. And I think, especially now with all the protests and all the movement, this national conversation, to presume that we want to essentially seize democracy from voters and give it back to politicians just seems like it's really missing the mark to me. And every city has had this come up from time to time. Oakland had it come up 10 years ago. They've got an elected city attorney, the only other elected female in the state of California. And Los Angeles had it come up 10 years ago where the mayor there said, I would really like it if the attorney reported to me. And it's the same arguments at all times. Does this person report to an elected official or do they report to the public? And I trust the public to make good decisions. And that's why I got almost 70% of the vote during the primary. I get that to mean that they're satisfied that I will carry out the responsibilities that they've entrusted me with, which is protecting them from gun violence, protecting them from frivolous lawsuits, whatever it may be. But ultimately, we have to trust the voters to make that decision. If they are unhappy with me in November, they will let me know, and Cory Briggs will take over, and we'll see how that goes. But that is the system that the voters have put into effect. I think there is a good reason for it, having been in the hot seat, taking positions that would have got me canned if I were appointed. I fully appreciate that. Let me just point out a quick thing with the criminal division. We do prosecute misdemeanors, but it's quality of life. The district attorney doesn't do that. So we respond to nuisances in communities, and that's why it's so important. We're the boots on the ground in a lot of neighborhoods, and we hear directly from people what it is that concerns them and where they want to see a response. I think it would be detrimental to the safety and security of our city to get rid of our criminal division.
Yeah, may I just have 20 seconds?
Sure.
Sure. I don't think it's anti-democratic to ask the voters periodically whether they want to reconsider their structure of government. But unless somebody's going to come forward with $1 million to put that on the ballot, the city council has to do that. It's not a regular question. So it's not anti-democratic to ask the voters to reconsider. They can reaffirm the situation they like, or they can say, we might need to revisit that. That's the essence of democracy. That's not anti-democratic.
Before I go to closing statements, let me ask the board. I think we can probably throw a few more questions at you guys. Anyone else want to ask?
I had a really brief one. We talked about transparency. That's a major thrust of Cory's campaign here. I just want to hear Mara express how realistic is it taking transparency so deep into the inner workings of the legal office of the city?
Well, I think, and I expressed this with 101 Ash, I mean, there's always a balancing test. Of course, the public wants to know. Of course, newspapers want to know. And I think that's really important. The checks and balances in place have to be respected. But when it comes to an attorney's work, our job is to try to keep our client out of trouble by doing things right at the front end. And it's also to defend our client when they get in trouble. And when we are defending, we are really leaving no stone unturned. And we're finding out things that we don't necessarily want to show with an adversarial party, because ultimately that's going to increase the damages that would be awarded, and that comes straight out of a taxpayer's pocket. And I just think that you really have to be very careful with that. I do want to get back to the issue of transparency. I've been long pushing, and I think I might have shared this with one of you, for a transparency office at the City of San Diego for over a year now. And I just can't get that support, especially with SB 1421. It's really important for the public to have access to records. And I think that's important. We're not doing things right. We have failures in our system, and I need some help to fix that. So I'm very supportive, but I think you always have to look at all the interests involved, and it's a timing issue. With litigation, it ultimately all does come out. And I think it's incumbent on us to guide our client to say, wait 6 months, wait a year, wait till this happens before you release this information so we don't hurt the city.
And Andrew, the answer depends on what it is that you're trying to protect. So if the city screwed something up and might owe somebody some money, yeah, it protects the taxpayers to hold that card close to the chest. I agree with that. If the issue is that the city screwed something up and the taxpayers would be protected by a disclosure, it should be disclosed. Fraud against the taxpayers should be disclosed because the taxpayers benefit. The law protects taxpayers when a fraud has been committed. So if we're distinguishing between the types of cases when the transparency is appropriate, sometimes it makes sense not to turn a card over. But as Mara just said, in litigation, all this stuff comes out anyways. So rather than paying lawyers hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars to prosecute and defend lawsuits for years and years and years, to get to the point that disclosure today would show us we're going to end up getting to, it makes sense to be transparent about it. If we're protecting the taxpayers with transparency, because something wrong happened against the taxpayers, let's know that now.
Any other questions? Why don't you guys give us your closing statements then? And Mara, why don't you go first?
All right, well, I want to thank you again. I was very honored to earn your endorsement during the primary, and I hope to earn it again this time. I think that these difficult times for everybody, and nobody's ever dealt with a pandemic. It's been 100 years. The city attorney needs a steady hand with proven results more than ever before. And the persons that we are dealing with very difficult issues, job loss, businesses that are concerned that they will not be able to stay open and employ people. We have had to reimagine how city government functions almost overnight. And we have, I don't believe the city is missing a beat. That really shows how resilient we are. But the public wants that steady hand, they want experience, and they want assurance that we will be able to get through this together. And that's what I hear about when I talk with the public. And I think that they're looking for someone that has shown a commitment to public service, as I have done for my entire career. And I've been honored by my peers for good delivery of services. And I've fully enjoyed that experience of doing that, but also look back on a record. And when I came into office, I vowed that I was going to protect San Diego, and I did that. And I did that by instituting immediately a gun violence restraining order program that is extraordinarily effective. And we've obtained about 500 of these, and stats show that for every 10, depending on who you believe, 10 or 20, you've saved a life. And that's pretty good. We also have taken the focus on to domestic violence, not just in the criminal prosecution, and I immediately bulked that up and poured more attorneys onto that issue. But I took over control of the Family Justice Center because it's not just getting through the justice system, it's also getting back on your feet. And we have taken that and expanded services to include human trafficking and helping people get back up on their feet. Very important. And my elder abuse task force has really made a difference in San Diego in cracking down on horrible independent living facilities that are really abusing folks that otherwise had been slipping through the cracks. And I'm proud of that work. I have a history of achievement. I think the voter needs to look at the way we've both run our campaigns. I think civility matters, and I always conduct myself professionally. This campaign has been very difficult. My opponent has even sued me personally to try to take away my compensation. That's never happened before, and it should never get to that level. So you're talking about a difference between somebody who has sued the city repeatedly over 80 times to stop progress and somebody who wants to help the city take its next step forward at a time when we need that assurance more than ever before. This is a person who is vindictive, as shown by how he has used his position as a candidate to sue me personally, so I have to go hire a personal attorney to defend my compensation. And it scares me to think of what he would do with the power of this office behind him. It would be a circus. He obstructs progress for the city, and I think that is something that we all need to bear in mind. Do we want to go on an extended wild ride, or do we want to roll up our sleeves and get through this pandemic together? I opt for the latter. I think experience matters, a record matters, and progress matters.
Cory.
Thanks again, everybody. I see that folks have stuck around an extra 20 minutes or so, so thanks very much for doing that. There's only one taxpayer advocate in this race, and I am not. I'm that candidate. I'm the only one who has focused a career on public service as opposed to public employment. I'm the only one who's approached every case against the city, every case against a government agency, asking one question. Is the agency and the public officials involved, are they following the rules? That's the only question. I do it transparently. This isn't, there are no personal attacks in this. I'm not critical of Mara as a person. She's a nice person. She's not a good lawyer. I'm not the nicest person in the world, but I am a good lawyer. The real question is whether we're going to make a change in jockeys in the middle of the race. Mara's claim is that we shouldn't make a change. My question is this: does anybody think we're winning the race? Does anybody really think that San Diego is sailing to victory right now? Look at all the scandals. The city attorney concerned about the city auditor concerned about the city attorney, city council concerned about the city attorney. When you talk about a wild ride threatening to prosecute journalists, and a few weeks ago wasn't the first one. What you want is somebody who knows how to ride the taxpayer's horse to victory. If I weren't successful at that, nobody would care about Cory Briggs in this race. The establishment wouldn't care. What we've seen with 101 Ash and so many others, the way the system works is the question is, are my friends opposed to it? It's not what's the best deal for taxpayers. It's whether the people who support me are in favor of it. How do they feel about it? I'm not talking about changing programs at work. I'm talking about fixing the ones that don't work. That's what I'm good at doing. Because I haven't been a government lawyer, I don't get to address them systemically. I have to address them on a case-by-case basis. That's the nature of the system. But at some point, it's not advantageous to anybody to fix them on a case-by-case in a case-by-case manner when they all have a common problem. The common problem is bad lawyering by the city. It's time to put somebody on the horse who knows how to get the horse to cross the finish line ahead of others. That's what we're missing. We do that transparently. We do it openly. We do it inclusively. I'm not looking to make headlines. I am looking to make a difference in San Diegans' lives. That's not what we have right now. So yes, it's trite to say that San Diegans deserve better, but just ask yourself, does anybody think San Diego's sailing to victory right now? At what point in the last 4 years would anybody say that with the city attorney's assistance, the city's sailing to victory? I think if you ask most people and give them the information, they'd say, City Attorney's Office has been a boat anchor. We need to change that. City Attorney's Office needs to start working with protecting the taxpayers, protecting public trust and confidence as the foremost goals. That's how everything needs to be approached. Not whether you're going to get an award or recognition, but whether at the end of the day, the public's better off. That's what I bring to this race, and I'm the only one who brings it. Thanks very much.
Thanks to you both for joining us today and for spending a little longer than we had asked you to do. So thank you very much.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.